Okay, so now I've gotten married to my husband. We have got better paying jobs, but we're still connected to the prayer movement. I think that's where we kind of left off. So that's like, we got married in June of 2008. I would say probably the next couple of years, we slowly started drifting away more from IHOP. Within that 2 years span, we had our son, Jonathan. So we're new parents. I'm working. Um, I landed my first HR job at Target, so I'm really excited about that. My husband is wrapping up school, getting ready to go into teaching. So our lives just look totally different. Now, as I mentioned before, we still were very connected to people at IHOP. I still had really close friends that were at IHOP. We would go to IHOP. My mom was still on staff at IHOP. I mean, there was just a lot of connective tissue there still. Um, and so, I didn't feel I did feel a little bit of a separation, but because I wasn't going to church and I wasn't on the base a lot, but I was connected to enough people that were still on the inside to where I felt like I was still part of the community. So I think for me, I can't speak for my husband, but at least for me, I think where I started separating myself theologically from IHOP was a couple of things. I think the first thing that kind of pricked my ear a little bit is we had a really close friend that we knew at IHOP, and his wife as well. They both met at IHOP, got married around the same time as us. They started deconstructing their faith, and they basically announced that they were no longer Christian. And that was a really big thing for me. I was like, wow, and these were two individuals that were very strong, in my opinion, theologically. Like, they were very strong theological Christians. And so that really kind of was like a huge shock to me. Not only because of that, but because their experience and their story was basically like, hey, we got on this journey because of our experience at IHOP and just some really negative things that happened to them, where they kind of butted heads with leadership about just certain things. And so I think that kind of led them down the road of deconstruction to ultimately saying they were no longer Christian. And so just hearing their stories about how they were treated at IHOP, and just like how, in my opinion, how wronged they were. I mean, from my understanding is that they had questions about why IHOP believed what they believed, and they were starting to come to different conclusions. Not, at least from my understanding, they weren't conclusions like I'm no longer a Christian, but like, hey, maybe like I see the end times theology differently than you do. And one of the negatives of IHOP, and I think anyone that's kind of, followed this IHOP story and have heard other people's experience at IHOP, is that they do not like to be challenged about their theology whatsoever. It is almost an indoctrination of, if you come here and you're on staff, everybody believes the same thing. You have the same end times eschatology. You have the same bridegroom paradigm. There is no room for individuality when it comes to your theology, which in my opinion sounds very cult-like. Which I don't know if I mentioned to you before, but one of the main rumors that was going around when I was at IHOP was that IHOP is a cult. And so there was always like this thing of like, you have to defend the prayer movement because everyone thinks it's a cult, but it's not. But as you kind of start peeling back the layers of the onion and you talk to people, and then you're like, oh my gosh, like that happened to you? That's really weird. This also happened to you? That's really odd. And you start kind of putting these compilations together, and then you're like, you might not be a cult, but some of the things that you do are cult-like behavior. And that was one of them, where it was, everybody believes the same thing. You cannot publicly say that you believe that. Now, you may struggle and question it. And if you did struggle and question, then it was like, well, you just pray in the prayer room, or, hey, like your faith is not strong enough. But they strongly, and I mean, I want to emphasize that, strongly discouraged anybody from having any different type of theological differences. And if you questioned it, they saw it as a challenge. And the stories that I have heard, I've never personally experienced this, but from the stories of my friends that I just talked about and other people I've read their stories, is that they make it their mission to tear you down and to excommunicate you from the community because they don't want other people listening to what you have to say. I know it sounds very harsh and very strong, but that is just the truth. It happened to our friends. It's happened to a multitude of people where if you think differently, they see that as a threat. Just leave that there. So that was definitely an eye-opening experience for me where I'm like, man, how can a ministry say that they love God, love people, and they treat people like shit like that? Like, that's not okay. So that was definitely something where I was kind of like, okay, well, at first I thought that's just unfortunate. And the people that they were alleging treated them bad, I kind of already had like some not great feelings about those people anyway, because I had experienced firsthand, not like it was directed to me, but I had witnessed some of their nastiness to other people. And I was kind of like, when they were telling me like, this person did this and that, and I was like, yeah, I can kind of see that because I've seen them do that to other people. But I thought their experience overall was just kind of a one-off fluke. But then as I kind of just started being more open-minded to hearing more people's stories, then their story started becoming very common. And so that was something I had to take into consideration. But I think the main thing that I was like, yeah, like I can't jive with IHOP anymore in terms of their theology was my own deconstruction story. I didn't necessarily deconstruct from a church hurt or from a certain experience nonetheless. I know a lot of people's experience deconstructing is they've had a very significant pivotal moment. I think mine was just that I felt so dead in my spiritual journey. You know, I felt so spiritually alive when I first came to IHOP, and then once I left IHOP and I was very plugged into my church, because, you know, me and my husband got involved in his family's church and we were doing music and leading a youth group and stuff, but I just felt so dead on the inside spiritually. I just felt like I was going through the motions. And I think a lot of that too was I was going through a very tough time through my own experience with just being a mom, working full time, and then finding out my son has special needs. You know, he's autistic. And so it's like, there was just a lot going on in my life. And I just didn't feel like I had a lot of help. I had a lot of resources. I was depressed, anxious. And I was just kind of like, is God even real? Like, why would God give me, you know, a kid that's on the special needs spectrum and I have no clue what to do? Why would God do this? Why is he allowing me to be anxious? Why is he allowing me to be depressed? And I was not in a good place. And I just remember, I can't remember now. It was maybe like 2017, 2018. I just remember getting to a place in my faith where I was like, okay, God, if you're even real, then I can't remember the exact prayer, but basically the prayer summarized like, remove everything that I've learned about you that's not true and teach me what is really true about yourself. Like, if you are even real, like, then remove everything that's not real, that's not true about you, and like replace it with what is, and like you teach me about who you are if you're even real. So that was like my like, okay, God, here's your time to shine. And he's definitely come through in my life in very many ways. But one of the things that I felt like God was kind of leading me through was like unlearning a lot of what I learned at IHOP. And some of that was really difficult for me because, again, there were moments at IHOP where I felt the most spiritually alive. But I've come to realize that a lot of it was just highs that I experienced of just being in community with people, or I don't know. I think some things were genuinely like God moments, but I think other times it was just, I was young and I'd never experienced anything like that before. And so you just you hold a very positive memory of something that maybe wasn't as positive, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But I really felt like I was starting to unlearn a lot of things about that. And I was just learning more about really what the Bible said about Jesus, what the Bible says about end times, maybe understanding different views of the end times. Maybe it's not a literal translation of what's going on in Revelation. Maybe some of it's metaphoric. Maybe some of those things have already happened. And so, I was just more open to exploring what it could be versus like, I think I've always been taught that like everything in the Bible is literal, except for some things like Psalm and Proverbs and all of that. But like anytime it was a story, anything that was prophetic, like that will happen or has happened. And so I gave myself liberty, honestly, through the grace of the Holy Spirit, just to explore and be like, what if it's not that? What if God's really trying to say something else? And so, especially scriptures that I really struggle with, like, I have no clue what this means. If it literally means that, like, that makes no freaking sense. And, just learning that, hey, maybe God's trying to say something different, and just opening my mind up to different theologians, different people that know the Bible way more than I do, that are credible in the Christian community outside of IHOP, because IHOP is a very unique way of looking at the Bible. And gosh, that was so healing for me. And it's still very much a healing journey, because for a while at certain points, like I couldn't even read my Bible because it was so triggering, because it's like, I don't even feel like I can relate to the Bible anymore. Like I was just not in a great place. I don't know how else to describe it. Just was not in a good place. But now I feel so much more comfortable. Like I enjoy reading the Bible now. I find it exciting. Like I enjoy reading it because I'm a lot more open-minded, and I have grace for myself to know the Holy Spirit's going to lead me in the right way. And I think sometimes when you leave a very controlling environment like IHOP, where you're taught pretty much the same thing, like you're not given an opportunity to look at the Bible in different lenses, like it's very scary to leave something that you feel like was the truth, and it's scared to give yourself liberties to check out other things. But I cannot tell you, like, that's the best answered prayer God's ever given me, of just like leading me down the right way of really understanding who he is. And I mean, I'm still figuring it out, but my theology is a lot different. And so really, I don't think I would ever go back to IHOP knowing their theological stance, knowing the stories of how they treat their staff, especially now with, IHOP and just the mess of Mike Bickle. I don't feel like I would ever feel comfortable going back through those doors. Now, that doesn't represent the people that I still know are very connected and involved. I still love those people dearly. They're still people that I consider friends. But I just can't see myself going back to a community like that, where I've grown in a different direction theologically. And I'm still a Christian, I still very much have my faith. It looks different now. And I would probably say I put myself in the camp of, if I had to put a label on myself, I've talked about this in my other YouTube videos, but I can't really label myself non-denominational, because there's some things that I don't ascribe to in the non-denominational world, but then I'm certainly not an evangelical anymore. But I'm not like Catholic either. Like I'm not very strict in that way. So it's like, it's hard to define myself. But I guess the easiest way to put a label on me is a progressive Christian. I have very progressive beliefs now. But that took time. That took a lot of time deconstructing and then relearning through solid theological things about how to read the Bible. And I'm still learning, honestly. So that's kind of where I'm at now with IHOP. Again, it wasn't malice or anything like that, but once I left and I started learning more things and hearing people's stories and just my own theological, spiritual journey, I'm like, I just don't think I could go back. I have grace for people that are still there because they genuinely think God called them to be there. And who am I to say that they are not to be there? But I would definitely question and maybe explore more if that's still the case now, understanding that Mike Bickle basically started this whole movement when he was in sexual sin, when he was abusing a 19-year-old. And gosh, that was the age, that was basically my age when I started going to IHOP. And I can remember how young and gullible and naive I was at that age. And so just the idea of somebody 40 years old taking advantage of someone at that age, it's just sickening to me. And I just don't know if I could really support something that's founded on that, if that makes sense. But again, I'm very far removed. I'm not in the weeds of it, but that's just kind of my thoughts, is that, the roots of a foundation will eventually bear the fruit of whatever it's rooted in. And IHOP never started on good roots, if the founder was doing those things. And so I can't support it. So I think now where I'm at is I don't feel comfortable going back, especially just the series of events of how they've handled the whole situation. Darvo, if you understand that, it's like deflect. It's basically like they have taken no responsibility until like fairly recently, and they've taken like probably the minimal amount of responsibility that they could. I mean, my son, I used to take my son to the prayer room. My mom used to take him. I don't feel comfortable taking him there. He's a teenage boy now, and I don't want him. I just don't want to send that message of, hey, the guy that founded this is really a messed up dude, but hey, let's still go back to the place that he started. Like I feel like that's sending a mixed signal. And I want him to have a good understanding of healthy sexual relationship in the context of marriage. And I want him to just have good examples. And so I just feel like when you go somewhere and the spiritual roots aren't good, it's just not a good example for anybody. So I don't feel comfortable sending my son there. I don't feel comfortable. My husband's not really comfortable either. Like, I can't even listen to the music anymore because it's just like, it's just different. It's just different now that you know the real truth of what was going on behind the scenes, which is just so gross. And again, I don't want to get into it because there's just so many things that have been revealed, but that's kind of basically it. So, okay. So let's go on to the next part where we talk about a dream that I had recently.